Great Answer, coming to you live from the rock bondage capital of the world, Madison, Wisconsin. I know that's true because I just got a package from Phoenix 42 Creations with a nice new set of rope to try out and enjoy, and it included in it that it was sent to the rope bondage capital of the world, and the post office delivered it. So while I used to say, hey, go ahead and you can ask Google if I'm right about that, now you can ask Google or the United States Postal Service whether or not Madison is the rope bondage capital of the world, and they both concur. So I am here, and I am as surprised to see you here as you are to hear me. You can thank Nee for that. Nee was a wonderful volunteer who I got to sit at a desk with for quite a while at ROPECRAFT in Austin. And she talked about how she enjoyed the Ropecast and how even though there are lots of other fantastic kink podcasts and even several rope podcasts out there, that my voice was still welcome, at least in some ears. So even if Nee is the only listener to this podcast, I am glad to keep doing it. And there will even be a segment where I will read some erotica, because that is what Nee said she liked to hear on the podcast, because I do listen. So if you want to hear a specific thing for me to talk about, you can always email me at greatanswer@gmail.com. That's GRAYDANCER. And I confess I was surprised to keep talking, because I sort of felt after I passed on the torch at ROPECRAFT, if you didn't hear about this, in October, I handed off the reins of ROPECRAFT to Ozma, who has been the producer of ROPECRAFT for a while and now is the director and also co-directs Tethered Together, which is another fantastic event. And I very happily passed on the torch to her with a musical number. And at the end of this podcast, if you want to, you can hear the musical number as it was performed live in Austin. So it's not the most fantastic audio quality, but I'm very appreciative to Madame Posh for getting that video on there. So I wasn't really sure if I had anything left to say, because, hey, if I'm not presenting and I'm not producing, what do I really have to talk about with rope? But that's kind of the point of me not producing or presenting again. I think I was so wrapped up or got so involved in the various administrative and technical details of those two kinds of callings that I sort of lost touch with the visceral joy of rope and kink. And so I am going back to doing things like, volunteering at times, not as a presenter, not as an administrator, but just helping out at my local dungeon, the Freya Project. Yay, shout out to Freya. And really only going to a couple of kink conventions. I've gone to several science fiction conventions, and I'll even be going to PAX South in January to volunteer at the True Dungeon. So apparently I can't get out of the dungeon, although this one's going to be more of a Dungeons and Dragons kind of live action thing, sort of a cross between a LARP and a haunted house. And I just got to say, that it is a lot of fun to be back in the trenches, to not be in charge of things, but to just have somebody tell me what to do, and I do the job, and then I go and take care of it. It's a much more relaxing place to be, and I'm getting to enjoy talking to people who actually don't know me. I had an interesting experience sitting at a desk where someone showed up and they had tied themselves in a very nice weave harness around their waist and used the excess rope on their chest, and they said, yeah, this is called a weave harness. They actually used a different name that I don't use anymore because the person isn't really that good a person and didn't invent it in the first place. But anyway, it's a weaving harness, and they were explaining to me all this stuff. Basically, I had the harness mansplained to me because they never asked me if I knew anything about harnesses or stuff like that, and that was great. It was wonderful. They had no idea who I was or that I had anything to do with the rope community, and it was really kind of cool. So I'm enjoying that and still trying to find my way back to that visceral joy where I can look forward to going to an event and not feel all of the external pressures of it. Now, if you're not interested in hearing about that kind of journey or that kind of stuff, hey, don't listen to the podcast anymore. That's fine. I'm not going to complain. I'm going back to the old goal, 5 listeners. When I started out the ROPECRAFT, I hoped I had to have 5 listeners, and I did. And in fact, at this point, I have gone to over 1 million downloads of this podcast over the years. No idea if there's going to be more. There is still a Patreon for Great Answer, and yes, I will still be doing that. And kudos to those patrons who have stuck it out with me. No offense, I won't be offended if you decide you don't want to do it anymore, because this has definitely not been the most consistent podcast out there. But we're working on that, and I'm pretty sure we do have some content for you. One of the things that the content is going to be is mentioning some of the things that I've written on the website medium.com. My name there is my legal name, Gray Miller. So if you go medium.com/@ Gray Miller, GrayMiller, you can read some of the things. Now, some of them are about sex, and there will be more that are about kink. I'm actually working on one about being a dominant without being an asshole, because that's certainly been something I've been trying to do with mixed success. I've got a few things in there on one on 3 things you should do before you peg your man. I have one that is on consent, because can't seem to get away from talking about that. I am no longer being active in terms of training that kind of stuff. You should talk to Iron Temple Dog or the NCSF and other places to talk to them about getting more within the kink world. I am going to write about it, though, and so the article I most recently read was about when you can withdraw consent. And I also wrote one that technically it's called 3 Steps to Being a Smarter Man. And I am taking aim at some of the sort of cultural conditioning that we men have. And it's something that I don't think it translates directly to kink in terms of men, because gender is a social construct and it's a wide and varied spectrum, just that one part. And this has more to do with an aspect of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I think it probably applies pretty well to dominance mainly, but at the same time, it probably could apply to anyone who simply doesn't quite understand 2 basic principles. And the first one of those principles is the fact, and I'm going to look this up so I get it right, because I don't want to have to edit. We all know how I feel about editing. That's just not fun at all. And of course, now that I'm looking for it, I thought I had it set up, and I didn't have it set up. So clicking, you get to hear the wonderful sound of clicking here. There we are. Publish stories, 3 Steps to Being a Smarter Man. And here we go. So here's the first part of the principle. First thing is that you or me, no one of us, we are not smarter than everybody at anything. Okay? I used to teach a class where I used the example of somebody somewhere has a cock bigger than yours. Okay, no matter how much I learn about something, somebody knows more. And that person's name is probably Maymoon. No matter how good I am at something, somebody will do it better, or is about to do it better, because I showed them one way it could be done, and they looked at it and said, oh, I could do better than that, and they do. Okay? You're never going to be the best at anything, except maybe momentarily. And that's fine, but just understand that you're never going to stay the best at any one thing, and that's okay. All right? And it leads to the second, more difficult thing to accept, which is that you are not smarter than anybody at everything. Okay, you can set up all kinds of things. I remember one night I had a person come up to me, and she was a submissive, and she said, my master has done 5 scenes tonight. How many have you done? And I had only done 1. But it was a really good scene, and that was my metric for success. Her metric for success was how many scenes her partner did, and that was another totally valid thing to do. But the fact is that at any one thing, you are possibly really good at, but everybody has something that they are better at, or that they know that you don't know, even if it's just the experience of being themselves. Now remember, you may think, well, yeah, sure, they're really good at somersaults, but who really cares? What good does that do? Well, here's the thing. You think of that old Richard III thing, for want of a nail. History's full of examples of people thinking that things aren't important when they turn out to be really important. Okay, there are a lot of people in the consent incident history that said, oh, well, I can do this thing. It won't be a big deal. Guess what? It turned out to be a big deal. So it's a good idea to sort of keep it humble. Don't assume that you can't learn something from anyone, even if what you're learning is how not to do something. Okay, so here's my 3 steps I think that we should take. We should try 3 things you can do if you are worried about this whole idea that you are not realizing that you can learn something from everyone, and that no matter how good you are, there's somebody that's going to be better than you eventually. If you can't accept that, here's some ways to kind of internalize that. The first step is to listen to somebody. Now, I have a challenge, especially for male dominance. I want you to go to a class that is aimed at bottoms and sit in the class, and if they ask why you're there, say, I'm here to listen. And then do that. Shut the fuck up. Keep your mouth shut. Even if they are saying something that you know is absolutely wrong, that you are worried is going to endanger their lives and cause chaos and destruction and the fall of Western civilization. Hey, that's already happened. Okay? Too late. So just listen. Just sit there. It will be hard. I the first time I did this, it was at ShibariCon. And it was at a class done by Mrs. B on feminism and kink. And I went in there and I saw things and heard things that not only did I disagree with, but that other feminists also disagreed with. And I kept my mouth shut. And it was hard. It was difficult. But it was useful. Okay? Here's a place you can bonus points. If you find someone to listen to, try to find someone who is different than you in some significant way. If you're a top, listen to a bottom. If you are white, listen to a person of color. If you are one gender, listen to somebody who's a different gender. Okay? Just listen. Don't try and put forth a counterpoint. Don't ask for clarification. Don't even explain your point of view. Just listen. That's the first step. It's a challenge. See if you can do it. If you're saying, well, that doesn't matter, why would that be worth doing? Well, I guess you're falling into that category of people that think something is not important when it actually is. Thank you for proving my point. So here's the second thing. Be useful instead of helpful. Or as Naya and I have a fun little saying, we call it helpy. There's a difference between being helpful and being helpy. Helpy, and I can give a great example because my brother-in-law did a helpy thing the other day. It's the holiday season when we're recording this, and my sister wanted to make some very simple Christmas cookies for people. She's a very busy person. She's a dance instructor and performer, and they have a kid, and so, not a lot of time. And so she asked him to please, on the way home from work, pick up 3 ingredients for some simple cookies. He showed up with 12 ingredients for a much more complicated recipe that he was sure would be better. Do not do this, okay? When somebody says they need some help, instead of trying to improve on it, instead of offering them options, just listen. Pick one time that you're going to listen to what they say and just do that thing. All right? Just do the thing. It's not that hard, but they may be wrong. They may have turned out. But what we're trying to do is work towards the understanding that the best way to help other people is trust that they know what they need. That will help, especially for some of us who may have heard the term white knight. Help us listen to people before we jump in and try and solve things. And I am telling you this, by the way, not because I am an expert at it or because I'm good at it. I am aware that it is something that I need to work on, and so I am just saying, hey, we're all in this together, and it is a struggle for me too. Naya will laugh at me sometimes because I will start to offer things, and she'll just give me this look, and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm doing that thing. And she does it too sometimes. So we all run into it. It's just something we can work on. Last thing, And this is going to be one of the harder things. I don't know if you realize this, but it's been documented through studies that in classrooms and in education, young men, young boys are oftentimes rewarded and given positive reinforcement more than women are. It's kind of like the participation trophy. You know, if a boy and a girl do the same thing in a classroom, the boy is more likely to be praised for it, and the girl not so much. And this applies across the board, from just technical skills like math or spelling, to social skills. Oh, look at you! You helped out. Isn't that nice? Would be said to a young man who, say, did the dishes, whereas for a young woman, it might just have been expected, or something like that. So this is a well documented phenomenon, and something that it's another problem that just needs to be worked on in the classroom. That being said, as young men, we are used, or whoever we are, if we're used to the idea that if we do something, we're going to get a whole lot of credit for it, like that, people are going to pat us on the back, and we're expecting that kind of reward from people. If we're expecting that, we may feel like, hey, I listened to the person, and hey, I was useful instead of helpful. I deserve a pat on the back. Hey, do you see what I did? Look at me. Well, don't do that either. Okay, don't make a big deal about it. What you're doing when you do that is that you are expecting people to do more emotional labor. Okay, they're like, oh, not only did they do this thing, yeah, but now I have to give them credit for it so they feel good about it, so maybe they'll do it again. Okay, now, if somebody notices, if somebody looks and says, wow, you actually listened to me, I appreciate that, you can sit there. You don't have to say, oh, no, it's no big deal. No, it is a big deal. It is really a big deal for someone who has a lot of privilege and a lot of power to actually do that. That being said, don't make a big deal about it. Don't be self-deprecating, because, hey, if you say, oh, that's no big deal, well, great. Now you've just taken this thing the other person said, disagreed with it, because they said they appreciated it and you diminished it. Or worse, you're seeming like you're fishing for compliments. Oh, that's not a big deal. Don't worry about that. It's not, oh, no, please, don't tell me more. Tell me more about how great I am. All you need to do when somebody pays you a compliment is say, thank you. That's it. That's a complete sentence. Okay? Plus, you get bonus points. You look extra tough. All right? If all you say is thank you, acknowledge it, move on, that's the thing you do. So 3 things to try and do to work on not being quite so Dunning-Krugerish is to listen to somebody, preferably somebody different than you in some significant way. Be useful instead of helpful, and don't make a big deal about it. Okay, and you can apply these to your kink community, and I think these are some of the keys to get things out of that pedestal culture that we seem to be stuck in. So, all right, here endeth the lesson, as they say, and let's get into something a little more fun. As I said, I'm working on a book called The Dance of Smoke and Ash, and it is a erotic thriller that is set in a cigar bar / kink club. And I've been working on it for quite a while. It's got many thousands of words. I do have one beta reader who has encouraged me to read some of it or to keep writing on it. And I'm going to read a chapter here where, just to give you the setting, the main character is non-binary. And I'm actually doing my best to make sure that if I have my way, it'll be like Laura Antoniou's character Chris. You're never really sure what gender that person is. I'm as surprised as anyone to find myself writing that character. Originally, I was writing this from the point of view of a cishet white male, because that's what I know how to write. And this character just kind of jumped in and said, nope, this story's about me. And so that's what it is. This person is, in this situation, they are trying to infiltrate a different, rather nefarious club. I should add, this is a thriller and has sex magic in it. If you've read my books Nawashi or Jujun or Kumir, you know what kind of world this is set in. But basically, these people use sexual energy in the way that people use magic in other situations. Hang on a second, my cat seems to be trapped in the office. Oh, you poor cat. Let me help you out and rescue you. But you can't open the door yourself. There we go. All right, we will edit that out, of course. So, fix it in post. So, to put the scene in thing, we have a non-binary, omnisexual person who is there with their new partner, who is a woman from the community. She's new to kink and stuff like that. And in fact, well, I kind of give this away in the very beginning. She is originally a spy to try and shut down the Cigar Bar Kink Club. But like within the first page, you know that. So it's not really a spoiler. And along with him is an experienced kinkster. I can think of all kinds of fun descriptions for that. Is an experienced kinkster named Miss J. And Miss J, to describe her, she would be a very petite, very classy but smartass Filipina. And if that resembles somebody that you know, yes, I had her permission to use her as the model for this. So yeah, you may hear something that sounds very familiar, and I will also add, I have her permission to, she has read this particular excerpt and given her hearty approval. So if you are kind of surprised by some of the things that happened, I can tell you that the person who it's modeled after really enjoyed it. So, Chapter 15, Into Neon Sexualis. I let the beat of the music fill my chest, my belly sink deeper, and my hands wrapped around Rebecca and pulled her close. On her other side, Miss J clung to her waist, her small frame putting her eyes on a level with some dangerously precarious décolletage. I caught her eye, and she grinned at me, mouthing, "Thank you," under the music. I mouthed back, "You owe me one," and then started to dance with them. It's not really that hard to dance lead with two follows, especially with the way they moved. Mainly, the trick is to move with intention, but without expectation, letting each move organically lead into the other. If there's a collision, it's an opportunity for weight sharing, or sloughing down the body, or a pivot and a roll across planes of muscle and cloth. In this particular environment, it was the opportunity for more blatant groping, the occasional slap of ass or tit. The hierarchy of power exchange was as fluid as our motion, with one moment my arm around Rebecca's neck in a mock choke, and the next Miss J pushing my face between my lover's breasts, holding my face there until I gasped for breath, my pumping of my hips to the beat getting more urgent as I fought for air. When Rebecca spontaneously grabbed Miss J's arms from behind and pulled her ass back into a hip slam, I saw the tiny woman's eyes look pleading at me. I knew what she wanted, and I was rolling hot enough to want to give it to her, but there was a risk that Rebecca would freak. I thought back to what Lucas had said and mentally crossed my fingers as I prepared to fulfill Miss J's desire. I lifted my hand and slapped her across the face, the impact loud enough to carry over the beat. I saw Rebecca's eyes widen in shock and even felt the stares of some of the people around me. Mentally, I prayed that I wasn't about to get bounced from the club. And then Miss J's face came back up, eyes wide and dilated in post-orgasmic bliss. She twisted her head around and craned her head up to whisper, well, given the music, it was probably a shout, into Rebecca's ear. I saw my lover's eyes widen, and she looked at me. I was relieved it wasn't a glare and thought it might even look a little speculative. Then she looked down, and her mouth came on Miss J's in a passionate kiss. I melted into their embrace, one hand on Rebecca's denim-clad ass cheek and the other on Miss J's naked skin, slick with the juices of her orgasm. Both of them pressed their asses back into my hands, while at the same time one of Rebecca's hands snaked up around the back of my neck. Miss J's tiny breasts shifted under the sparkled drapery that was almost a dress. Her dark nipples almost blue in the flash of color show as they flashed out as she moved against me. Three-way kissing is much like three-way dancing. Full lips and tongues that simply come out and meet and nibble and gasp and touch everywhere. Neck and chin and ear and cheek and the soft warm wet of another mouth over and over. I felt my own juices flowing, hot and dominant, and I growled deep in my chest, knowing that what their ears couldn't hear, their bodies would feel. I spun their hips in my hand so they both turned face to face. I shot one hand up under each of their chins, my fingers under the jaw on one side while my thumb brushed their lips. Both eagerly opened their mouth and sucked my thumb down. Miss J looked like the platonic ideal of a fellatio rock star, eyes shut as her tongue and mouth worked my thumb as though it was legendary phallus ambrosia. Rebecca, though, unlike most women I've known, and myself when I'm inclined to gobble a cock, she didn't close her eyes. She locked her eyes on mine as she filleted me, drawing my thumb into her mouth well past the knuckle until I could feel the tip all the way at the back, where her throat was as open as her eyes. It wasn't as though she was holding back. Rather, by keeping our eyes locked, she was letting me know that she knew just how wanton she was being and didn't care that I knew. She and Miss J were side by side, hands roaming and stroking and pinching each other's tits even as they worked my hands. Miss J lost herself to the passion. Rebecca dove into it head first, eyes wide, knowing exactly what she was doing. It was just one more thing about her that made me fall even deeper. I hadn't wallowed in these kinds of feelings for a long time because I didn't trust them, but something about the way she was diving head first and eyes open into these experiences with me was breaking down my usual skeptical defenses. I kept the dance going while she rode my leg, quadricep pulsing to the beats under her crotch. I could see the damp spot she was leaving on my denim, and as she began rocking back and forth, I could feel the vibration of a high keening in her throat. There was no way anyone but me would know about it. The music was far too loud, but her eyes were wide now, cheeks indented as she sucked harder and ground down on my leg. I could feel the quiver of her thighs as they locked around me, and at this point she wasn't really dancing as much as simply perching on the organic vibrator that she turned my leg into. I wondered, idly, if Neon Sexualis had a plan for cleaning up squirting on the dance floor. A quick glance around revealed that we'd gathered a circle of gawkers, so perhaps this was not quite the usual level of sexual play on the dance floor. Then again, they were also giving us a pretty liberal splash zone, so perhaps this kind of thing happened all the time. Suddenly, I felt a pressure on my hand, the one that wasn't in Rebecca's mouth, and I resisted the urge to drop into a defensive stance. I knew who this was, and it was exactly what we'd hoped for, after all. At the same time, it made me a little nervous that the maitre d' had managed to come into our kinesphere without my noticing. He's got ninja host skills, I noted, and held up the note for Miss J to read. Her eyes took a moment to focus and then narrowed in annoyance as my finger popped out of her mouth. "God damn it!" she shouted. "I was just about to come." I grinned as I read the note for myself. "You are cordially invited to get it on the next level." I turned Miss J around and gave her a quick half-stroke, half-slap to her ass and drenched pussy. She tried to glare at me, but I was smiling too much for her to sustain it, and she laughed. Sure, we were here on enemy territory, trying to figure out what had been important enough to hurt Lucas. But if you couldn't have a little fun during reconnaissance, what was the point? So that's one part of it. Kind of gives you an idea of what kind of stuff happens. There wasn't a lot of magic in there, a bit of sex. And yes, I realize that there are a couple of areas where this is a rough draft. This is me reading the work in progress. The final one will be much more polished, I promise. And with that, I'm going to end the podcast. You get to listen to, if you want, about 5 minutes of the closing of ROPECRAFT, my closing of ROPECRAFT anyway, at the cabaret, the Flow Erotic Cabaret. I got to pass on the torch officially to Ozma to set the stage. I was up there in a kilt, and Ozma was sitting up there in lingerie, and I was dancing about and singing. And yeah, I found out that, you know what? With all of my dance degree and musical dance theater experience, it's been a while since I've done that, and man, was I out of breath quickly. So eventually, someday, I might actually redo the song in a more clear fashion so you can hear the lyrics. But I think there's some benefit to this live version. And you can also find the lyrics on my FetLife profile. And they're posted in my most recent writing where I talk about passing on the torch of ROPECRAFT. So in the meantime, like I said, I'm back. If you have comments, greatanswer@gmail.com. I will be doing some interviews. I'll be talking more about what it's like to try and reconnect with your kink. And I look forward to talking to you. Oh, hey, if you don't have a subscription to Medium, because they give you 3 articles a month, and then they sort of ask that you pay for it, which is great. It's worth paying for. It's only $5 a month, and it's really good content. But if you don't want to do that, you can subscribe to the Great Answer newsletter, which is at my site, greatanswer.com. And if you subscribe, I will be sending out friend links to the articles that I write so that you can read them without having to pay for it. So if that's something you're interested in, subscribe to the newsletter and we will get that out. So here it is, the closing to my ROPECRAFT experience called Ropular. I'm hoping that this becomes a tradition for every person who hands off an event to someone else. Whenever I need someone as rope-crafty as I, and let's face it, who else is as rope-crafty as I? My heartstrings all get tangled and knotty. When I just cannot take no more, I need someone to take over. I know, we know, that you're the one we need. So ROPECRAFT number 8, as we're running on caffeine and faith. Don't worry about how you will succeed. Follow my lead, and yes, indeed, you will be ropular. You're gonna be ropular. You'll get some enormous toys to stick into boys. Young and his badge to wear, contracts to prepare, Japanese words to pronounce with your ropular. You get to be ropular. You'll build a new bondage cube. You'll have lots of loot. Be the hitchin' bitch in charge. It's a good thing you got a pair we know are quite large. But think about it as a job that's tedious. You're a soccer mama, that's a bit obscenious. You can do it fine even without a penis. There's the money better, not when it comes to ropular. It's all about ropular. I forgot this part. Yeah. Brilliant as you are, that's what you're gonna be, totally ropular. La, 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 la. You'll be ropular, completely ropular. When you ride in elevators with those queer sex educators, just remember that they only want to help you throw a big inclusive party. Fucking smash the patriarchy! Do you care what's in their pants? Don't make me laugh. They're ropular. Please, it's all about ropular. You're gonna enjoy your popularity. It has been a great 8 ROPECRAFTs, but it's time for me to get off this ride. But you got this, and they all got it with you. In full confidence, and with no pretense, I can tell ROPECRAFT to leave. You're gonna rock your ropularity. La, la.